It was Christmas night, 1996, in Boulder, Colorado. The Ramsey family's sprawling home, trimmed with twinkling lights, looked like a postcard. Inside, 6-year-old JonBenét Ramsey had just returned from a festive evening at a friend's party. By all appearances, it was an ordinary holiday in a wealthy, picture-perfect neighborhood. But before dawn, something would happen inside that house which would shock the nation for decades. If you want to follow this chilling case, don't forget to like, subscribe, share, and click the notification bell. This is just the beginning of a mystery that still haunts America. At 5:52 a.m. on December 26, 1996, a frantic 911 call rang through the Boulder Police Department. Patsy Ramsey, JonBenét's mother, reported that her daughter was missing. Between gasps and sobs, she claimed she'd found a ransom note left on the staircase. The note demanded $118,000 in exchange for JonBenét's safe return, a strange and oddly specific amount. When officers arrived, the house didn't look like the scene of a break-in. There were no signs of forced entry, yet the family insisted that JonBenét had been kidnapped while they slept upstairs. Friends and neighbors quickly arrived to comfort the Ramseys, filling the home before police could secure the crime scene. Hours later, Detective Linda Arndt instructed John Ramsey, JonBenét's father, to search the house from top to bottom. It was then, in the basement, that John discovered something horrifying. The lifeless body of JonBenét, covered in a white blanket. Her small frame was hidden behind a door in a little-used room. The ransom note, the staged kidnapping, the body found inside the home, nothing made sense. Why would kidnappers leave her behind? Why would they demand a ransom if JonBenét was already dead? And how did the crime happen inside a home full of people without anyone noticing? From that moment, suspicion shifted rapidly. The investigation into JonBenét Ramsey's death was no longer about rescuing a child. It became a battle over who was responsible. Was it an intruder who slipped in unnoticed? Or was the answer buried within the Ramsey household itself? What do you think? Was the ransom note the work of a stranger, or was it written to mislead investigators from the start? The ransom note found on the staircase became the first major clue, but also one of the most baffling pieces of evidence in the case. It was unusually long, over 2.5 pages, written in shaky block letters. Most ransom notes are short, direct, and to the point. This one read more like a theatrical performance. The note demanded $118,000, the exact amount of John Ramsey's Christmas bonus from his company that year. That detail raised immediate questions. How could an intruder possibly know such private financial information? Even stranger, handwriting experts determined the note had been written on paper torn from a legal pad found inside the Ramsey home. The pen used to write it, also from their house. This meant the author sat inside the Ramsey residence long enough to calmly compose a multi-page letter. A chilling thought. Investigators began looking closely at the Ramseys themselves. Patsy Ramsey had reported finding the note when she walked downstairs early that morning. She said she'd planned to make coffee, only to spot the ransom demand on the stairs. Could she have written it herself? Or was someone else in the home framing her? At the same time, police couldn't ignore the basement. JonBenét's body had been discovered with duct tape across her mouth and a garrote, a homemade strangulation device fashioned from a paintbrush handle and cord, wrapped around her neck. The brutality stunned investigators. This was not a clean, quick crime of opportunity. It felt personal, deliberate. The autopsy revealed something even darker. JonBenét had suffered a skull fracture, along with signs of strangulation. The coroner also noted indications of prior trauma that raised suspicions of abuse. But the evidence was not clear-cut. Interpretations varied, and debate raged over what it really proved. Meanwhile, the Ramseys publicly denied any involvement. They hired lawyers, gave interviews, and presented themselves as a family grieving a terrible loss while under unfair suspicion. Still, police faced a puzzle they couldn't untangle. The ransom note suggested kidnapping. The body in the house suggested murder. And the evidence, from the staged scene to the odd details, left investigators divided from the very start. Do you think the note was a genuine demand for ransom, or just a cover-up to disguise what had already happened? In the days following JonBenét's death, the investigation spiraled into chaos. The Boulder Police Department had never handled a case of this magnitude, and their early mistakes would haunt the case for decades. For one, the crime scene inside the Ramsey home was far from secure. Friends, neighbors, even members of the family's church were allowed inside in the hours after the discovery. Some wandered through the kitchen, others prayed in the living room, all while key evidence could have been contaminated. Perhaps the most damaging mistake came when John Ramsey was permitted to search the house with a family friend. In the basement, John opened a door to a small, windowless storage room. There, he found his daughter's body, covered with a white blanket. He lifted her into his arms, carried her upstairs, and laid her on the floor. It was an understandable reaction for a grieving father, but it destroyed any chance of preserving the crime scene as it was. At the same time, suspicion was beginning to grow in two directions, inside the family and outside it. Police struggled to decide whether the Ramseys were grieving parents or deceptive suspects. One key detail continued to gnaw at investigators: the ransom note. It referenced a foreign faction, a phrase that felt theatrical, almost cinematic, and the language throughout sounded like it had been pieced together from crime movies, not a genuine kidnapper. The FBI, brought in to consult, leaned toward the theory that the note was staged. But who had staged it? A parent covering up an accident? A sibling rivalry gone too far? Or a meticulous intruder hoping to frame the family? The media, meanwhile, descended on Boulder. Tabloid headlines screamed accusations. TV crews camped outside the Ramsey home, turning the quiet neighborhood into a circus. In a matter of days, the Ramseys went from grieving parents to household names, their faces plastered across newspapers around the world. Behind the scenes, detectives were under pressure. Leads poured in, tips about suspicious neighbors, drifters passing through town, even former employees of John Ramsey's company. Yet nothing concrete tied an outsider to the crime. And so, investigators kept circling back to the Ramseys themselves. Patsy, with her beauty queen past and polished public image. John, a successful businessman with secrets of his own. And Burke, their 9-year-old son, whose behavior struck some as strangely calm in the aftermath. The cracks in the family portrait were beginning to show, and investigators believed the answers lay somewhere inside that Boulder mansion. Do you think police should have focused more on outside suspects from the beginning? Or was their instinct to zero in on the family the right call? The ransom note remained the centerpiece of the investigation. 3 pages long, it was unlike anything investigators had seen in previous kidnappings. The note demanded $118,000, an oddly specific figure that nearly matched John Ramsey's Christmas bonus that year. To detectives, this was either a chilling coincidence or a sign the writer knew the family intimately. Handwriting experts were called in, and the spotlight immediately fell on Patsy Ramsey. Investigators believed portions of her handwriting bore similarities to the ransom note. Patsy denied this completely, insisting she had nothing to do with her daughter's death. Independent handwriting analysts outside law enforcement remained divided, some suggesting strong similarities, others saying there was no match. The inconsistencies didn't stop there. Police struggled with the timeline of events from the morning of December 26th. When Patsy dialed 911, her voice carried panic and desperation. But when audio experts later analyzed the tape, they believed they could hear faint voices in the background after Patsy thought she had hung up, possibly John and Burke. Some believed Burke might have been awake that morning, contradicting the family's claims. Yet there was still the disturbing reality of the body itself. JonBenét's skull had been fractured, but she had also been strangled with a homemade garrote, a cord tied to a broken paintbrush handle. This detail complicated theories. If it were an accident, why the garrote? If it were an intruder, why leave a ransom note and never collect the money? Public pressure mounted. Television pundits dissected every word, every smile, every hesitation in the Ramseys' interviews. Some portrayed John and Patsy as cold and calculating. Others saw them as victims of a rush to judgment. By now, the Boulder Police and the District Attorney's Office were at odds. Police leaned heavily toward the family's involvement, while the DA's team worried the evidence wasn't strong enough to build a case. It was a split that would plague the investigation for years. And through it all, Burke Ramsey remained the quiet figure in the background. A boy who had lost his sister, yet was increasingly whispered about as someone who might know more than he let on. The Ramsey family, facing growing suspicion, made a bold move. They hired their own team of high-profile lawyers and investigators, determined to clear their names. This act only deepened the divide. To some, it was the natural response of wealthy parents under siege. To others, it was the behavior of people with something to hide. What no one could deny was this: JonBenét's case was no longer just a police investigation. It was becoming a national obsession. Do you think the ransom note was staged inside the house? Or could it really have been the work of a stranger? If you want to keep uncovering the twists and contradictions of this haunting case, make sure you're like, share, subscribed, and hit the bell. As 1997 began, the investigation into JonBenét's death was already collapsing under the weight of its contradictions. The Boulder police were criticized for their mishandling of the crime scene, allowing friends, clergy, and even victim advocates to move through the house before it had been fully secured. Potential evidence was contaminated before forensic experts ever laid eyes on it. Still, there were clues that refused to be ignored. Fibers from Patsy Ramsey's clothing appeared to match fibers found on the duct tape recovered from JonBenét's mouth. The paintbrush used to create the garrote had been broken from one of Patsy's own art supplies inside the home. Yet none of this was definitive proof. It raised questions, but it didn't answer them. The autopsy added another disturbing layer. Alongside the blunt force trauma and strangulation, there were indications of possible prior sexual contact. Some experts pointed to vaginal injuries as evidence of chronic abuse, while others argued they could have been the result of medical exams or even accidental irritation. This single point of disagreement would split medical examiners, police, and media commentators for decades. Meanwhile, the Ramseys sought to reclaim control of the narrative. In interviews, they denied all involvement and insisted the police had tunnel vision. They pointed instead to the possibility of an intruder, someone who had slipped into their home unnoticed on Christmas night. They hired private investigators to explore this angle, and soon, reports began surfacing of suspicious neighbors, contractors, and even strangers seen lurking around the neighborhood. Despite their efforts, public opinion was tilting against them. Tabloid headlines blared accusations. Editorials painted the Ramseys as a wealthy family using money and connections to shield themselves. Some of the most cutting criticism came not from reporters but from retired detectives across the country who declared that the parents were the most likely suspects. The case also became a spectacle in popular culture. Television specials recreated the crime scene. Talk shows debated theories. Every time John or Patsy spoke publicly, it was dissected frame by frame. Even Burke, just a child, was dragged into speculation he couldn't possibly defend himself against. Behind closed doors, the police continued to press their theory of family involvement. Detectives scrutinized the Ramseys' behavior that night. Why had Patsy dressed in the same clothes from the day before when she called 911? Why had the family waited to pack for their trip to Michigan until the morning after Christmas? Why did the ransom note demand such a strangely specific amount of money? But the cracks in the investigation widened with every passing week. The district attorney's office and the police department were still clashing over whether there was enough evidence to push forward with charges. Each side accused the other of failing JonBenét. And while the adults argued, the one undeniable truth remained buried in the middle of it all. A 6-year-old girl had been brutally murdered in her own home, and no one had been held accountable. Question for you: do you think the early contamination of the crime scene doomed this investigation from the start? Spring of 1997 brought no clarity, only more suspicion. The Boulder police doubled down on the theory that someone inside the Ramsey household was responsible, while the family's defense team pushed back, highlighting every inconsistency in the investigation. The media pressure was relentless. Patsy Ramsey, once admired for her beauty and poise as a former Miss West Virginia, was now cast as a mother under suspicion. Every facial expression, every tone of voice in her interviews was picked apart. Some viewers saw genuine grief. Others saw calculation. John Ramsey, a successful businessman, was painted either as a grieving father or a man too detached to be innocent. Amid the speculation, the Ramseys made a stunning choice. They agreed to sit for a nationally televised interview with Barbara Walters. It was risky. They spoke of their love for JonBenét, their belief that an outsider had broken into their home, and their frustration with the police. For some, it humanized them. For others, it reinforced the sense they were managing their image rather than cooperating with investigators. Inside the investigation, forensic testing continued. One key piece of evidence was a DNA profile recovered from JonBenét's underwear. It did not match John, Patsy, or Burke. At the time, technology was limited, and the profile was partial, but it offered the tantalizing possibility of an unknown intruder. Police, however, argued that the DNA might have been contamination from the manufacturing process or a transfer that had nothing to do with the crime. Meanwhile, handwriting experts remained locked in disagreement over the ransom note. The note was oddly theatrical, echoing lines from popular movies and filled with inconsistencies. It began with "Listen carefully" and ended with "Victory, SBTC," initials that no one could conclusively explain. Was it the signature of a deranged killer, or a staged distraction written by someone inside the house? Behind the scenes, friction between Boulder's police and prosecutors reached a boiling point. Police wanted to push for a grand jury. The district attorney's office insisted the evidence wasn't strong enough. That battle over whether to indict would stall the case for years, leaving JonBenét's murder suspended in limbo. By mid-1997, the Ramseys found themselves isolated. Neighbors whispered. Friends distanced themselves. Even some family members quietly questioned their story. And yet, the Ramseys never wavered publicly. They insisted an intruder killed their daughter, and that the real danger was still out there. As the case dragged on, one question grew louder in the public mind. Was this truly the work of an outsider, or had the answer been inside the Ramsey home all along? Do you think the unknown DNA points to an intruder, or is it just another red herring in a case full of dead ends? By late 1997, the JonBenét Ramsey case had shifted from a local tragedy into a nationwide obsession. Every television network, every magazine rack, every radio talk show carried speculation. And with the absence of solid answers, theories began to multiply. One of the most disturbing theories began circling around Burke Ramsey, JonBenét's 9-year-old brother. Some believed that Burke, perhaps in a moment of childhood anger, had accidentally harmed his sister, and that the parents had staged the crime scene to protect him. On paper, it seemed plausible to some investigators. There were no signs of forced entry, the ransom note appeared staged, and the weapon used, the garrote made from Patsy's paintbrush, was found inside the house. But others pushed back strongly. Could a 9-year-old really have caused the kind of injuries found on JonBenét's body? Could a child have written such a lengthy ransom note? The theory was chilling, but it raised more questions than it answered. Meanwhile, the family's legal battle was intensifying. The Ramseys' lawyers accused the Boulder police of conducting a biased investigation, locked on the family from the very beginning. Detectives countered that no credible evidence pointed to an intruder. The result was gridlock, an investigation that seemed to go nowhere while the media storm only grew louder. Journalists swarmed Boulder. Paparazzi followed the Ramseys everywhere. Editorials debated their guilt as if it were fact, while true crime authors began writing books before the case had even moved forward. For the Ramseys, every attempt to defend themselves, interviews, press conferences, even Christmas cards, became fodder for more suspicion. The ransom note itself continued to haunt the case. Linguistic experts noted strange phrasing, such as, "Don't try to grow a brain," which sounded almost cinematic. Some pointed out that it seemed unusually long for a ransom demand, and the fact that it was written on paper from inside the Ramsey home suggested whoever wrote it was already there. At the same time, the DNA evidence, though partial, gave defenders of the intruder theory something to hold on to. Could a stranger have slipped into the house while the Ramseys slept, staged the ransom note, and carried out the killing before vanishing into the night? The lack of answers meant the theories became more extreme. Some believed it was a family cover-up. Others were convinced of a shadowy figure who had stalked JonBenét for weeks. And then there were those who thought the truth might be something no one had even imagined yet. For investigators, one reality was unavoidable. The longer the case dragged on without an arrest, the harder it would be to ever solve. Do you think Burke should have been investigated more seriously? Or was this theory unfair to a grieving child? By 1998, pressure on Boulder authorities was impossible to ignore. Public outrage grew louder with each passing month, demanding movement in the case. Finally, prosecutors convened a grand jury to consider the evidence against the Ramseys. For many, this felt like the moment when answers would finally come. The grand jury process stretched over more than a year. Witnesses were called, forensic experts testified, and the infamous ransom note was analyzed again and again. Jurors reviewed crime scene photographs, timelines, and the conflicting statements from the Ramsey family. But just like the investigation itself, the testimony revealed more contradictions than clarity. Behind closed doors, jurors wrestled with two competing pictures. On one hand, there were fibers linking Patsy's clothing to the duct tape, the bizarre ransom note written on paper from inside the home, and the lack of forced entry. On the other hand, there was DNA from an unidentified male found in JonBenét's underwear, a possible sign of an intruder. In 1999, the grand jury secretly voted to indict John and Patsy Ramsey on charges of child abuse resulting in death. But in a shocking move, Boulder District Attorney Alex Hunter declined to sign the indictment. He argued the evidence wasn't strong enough to secure a conviction. The decision wasn't made public until years later, leaving the public to believe the jury had taken no action at all. For the Ramseys, the ordeal only deepened their sense of persecution. They claimed vindication, pointing out that no charges were filed. But critics saw it differently. To them, this was proof that prosecutors had bowed to pressure, unwilling to risk a high-profile trial against a wealthy, well-connected family. Meanwhile, the case's cultural grip tightened. Books, TV documentaries, and tabloid specials kept the story alive, each offering their own theory. Was it a kidnapping gone wrong? A family tragedy covered up? Or a predator who slipped through the cracks? What made the case so haunting was the uncertainty. With each piece of evidence, the picture shifted. No theory fit perfectly, but each seemed possible. And while the public argued, JonBenét's killer remained free. The grand jury's hidden indictment underscored a painful reality. Justice for JonBenét had slipped even further out of reach. What do you think? Should the DA have moved forward with the indictment, even if the evidence wasn't airtight? And if you're deep into this mystery with us, don't forget, share this video, subscribe to the channel, hit the notification bell. Your support helps us keep telling these stories that the world should never forget. The early 2000s brought a wave of new hope into the JonBenét Ramsey investigation. DNA technology had advanced rapidly since the late 1990s, and Boulder authorities revisited key pieces of evidence in the case. The partial DNA profile found on JonBenét's underwear, once considered inconclusive, could now be tested with far greater precision. In 2003, forensic scientists reanalyzed the samples. This time, the results confirmed the presence of unidentified male DNA that did not match John, Patsy, or Burke Ramsey. For defenders of the intruder theory, this was a breakthrough. For critics, it was still just a single thread of evidence in a much larger, tangled web. Meanwhile, public fascination with the case hadn't waned. Television specials resurfaced every holiday season, marking the anniversary of JonBenét's death. Each year, viewers were reminded of the smiling blonde child in pageant dresses juxtaposed against the haunting mystery of her murder. In 2006, the case took an unexpected turn that shocked the world. John Mark Carr, a 41-year-old American schoolteacher living abroad, confessed to killing JonBenét. He claimed he had been present in the Ramsey home the night of the murder, describing details that convinced some investigators he could be the long-elusive suspect. His arrest in Thailand set off a media frenzy. Reporters swarmed airports as Carr was extradited to the United States, with headlines suggesting that the mystery might finally be solved. For a moment, the world held its breath, but the excitement quickly unraveled. DNA testing proved that Carr's genetic profile did not match the evidence found on JonBenét's body. His confession was exposed as a disturbing fabrication, a fantasy, not a fact. He had inserted himself into one of the most infamous crimes in modern history, and investigators were left back where they started. The episode was humiliating for law enforcement, who had poured resources into pursuing Carr. It also reopened old wounds for the Ramsey family, who endured another round of media scrutiny before Carr was dismissed as a fraud. Still, the incident highlighted something chilling. JonBenét's case had become so iconic that people were willing to lie their way into it, chasing attention through tragedy. The false lead left the central question as sharp as ever. If not Carr, if not the Ramseys, then who? Do you think John Mark Carr was just seeking fame? Or could he have known something investigators never uncovered? The failure of the John Mark Carr lead in 2006 left investigators and the public deflated. For a moment, it had seemed like the case might finally be solved, but the truth was harsher. 10 years after JonBenét's death, police were no closer to finding her killer. Still, technology continued to evolve. In 2008, Boulder District Attorney Mary Lacy announced something shocking. New DNA tests had officially cleared John, Patsy, and Burke Ramsey of involvement. The touch DNA, taken from JonBenét's clothing, showed no connection to anyone in the family. Lacy even issued a formal apology to the Ramseys for years of suspicion and public accusations. But not everyone was convinced. Some experts argued the DNA could have been the result of contamination, perhaps from factory workers where the clothing was made. Critics accused the DA's office of being too quick to exonerate the family, pointing out that circumstantial evidence still raised troubling questions. Meanwhile, the Ramseys' lives had changed dramatically. Patsy Ramsey, who had battled ovarian cancer for years, passed away in 2006, still insisting on her family's innocence. John Ramsey tried to rebuild his life, but the shadow of JonBenét's murder and years of suspicion never truly left him. As the case entered its second decade, a troubling reality became clear. JonBenét's story was no longer just a murder investigation. It had become a cultural obsession, a media circus, and a mirror reflecting flaws in the criminal justice system. But behind all the noise, one chilling fact remained. The person who killed JonBenét was still out there. Do you believe the DNA evidence truly clears the Ramseys? Or do you think investigators may have overlooked something? By 2008, JonBenét Ramsey's case had taken yet another dramatic turn. District Attorney Mary Lacy's announcement that new, touch DNA evidence cleared the Ramsey family was headline news worldwide. For years, suspicion had clouded every move John and Patsy Ramsey made, every word they spoke, and even how their young son, Burke, was portrayed in the media. Now, with one sweeping declaration, the Boulder DA's office was publicly apologizing, saying the family should be considered victims, not suspects. But this apology did not settle the debate. Critics, including former investigators and independent forensic experts, immediately pushed back. They pointed out that the DNA samples in question were minuscule, just a few skin cells that could have been transferred onto JonBenét's clothing anywhere along the supply chain, from the factory floor to the store shelves. If that were true, the so-called breakthrough meant nothing. Inside Boulder law enforcement, the tension grew worse. Many detectives who had worked the case from the beginning still believed that someone in the Ramsey household was involved, directly or indirectly. To them, Lacy's announcement wasn't justice. It was political damage control. After more than a decade of intense public scrutiny, lawsuits, and media portrayals that painted Boulder police as incompetent or biased, the DA's office seemed eager to rewrite the narrative. For the Ramseys, the announcement came too late to heal all wounds. Patsy Ramsey had passed away from ovarian cancer in 2006, never living to hear the words of exoneration. John Ramsey accepted the apology, but privately, he admitted that the damage to their lives could never truly be undone. Friends recalled how the family's once promising future had been shattered in a single night, and the shadow of JonBenét's death continued to define them. Meanwhile, the case itself was at a crossroads. If the family was officially cleared, then investigators had to refocus on the idea of an intruder. But after so many years, leads had gone cold. Witness statements had faded in memory, physical evidence had degraded, and countless tips had turned into dead ends. And yet, the fascination with JonBenét's story never disappeared. Each holiday season, News outlets replayed the story of the 6-year-old beauty queen found murdered in her own home on Christmas night. Documentaries and talk shows debated the ransom note, the basement window, and the odd staging of the crime scene. Theories multiplied, but answers remained elusive. The pressure on Boulder law enforcement grew heavier with each passing year. To the public, JonBenét's case was not just another unsolved murder. It was a cultural touchstone, a mystery that symbolized both the failures and possibilities of modern policing. For investigators, it was a haunting reminder that somewhere out there, walking free, perhaps even watching the coverage, was the person who had killed a little girl and gotten away with it for more than a decade. The question now was unavoidable. If not the Ramseys, then who? Do you believe the DNA evidence truly pointed to an intruder? Or was it too weak to outweigh the other troubling details in the Ramsey home? As the 2010s began, JonBenét's case remained one of the most polarizing mysteries in America. New documentaries, books, and media specials kept the story alive, but inside police files, progress was agonizingly slow. Despite DNA testing advancements and a renewed push toward the intruder theory, the evidence was far from conclusive. In 2010, Boulder authorities quietly reached out to outside agencies, hoping that fresh eyes might spark new leads. Retired FBI agents, forensic psychologists, and criminal profilers were consulted. Many pointed back to the ransom note, a bizarre, lengthy message written in the Ramsey home, using the family's own notepad and pen. Its tone was theatrical, filled with odd details, including a ransom demand for $118,000, the exact amount of John Ramsey's Christmas bonus. Some experts argued that the note was a clumsy attempt at staging, not the work of a professional kidnapper. Others suggested it could have been written by someone familiar with John Ramsey's finances, hinting at an intruder who knew far more about the family than random chance would allow. The debate reignited tension between two camps, those convinced of family involvement and those steadfast in the intruder theory. In the intruder camp, investigators looked closely at known offenders in the Boulder area at the time, particularly individuals with histories of breaking into homes or crimes against children. The basement window, once dismissed as irrelevant, was revisited as a possible entry point. Could someone have slipped inside unnoticed, while the Ramseys slept upstairs? Yet skeptics pointed to how little evidence supported this idea. There were no clear signs of forced entry, no muddy footprints, and no strange fingerprints left in obvious places. Even the cobwebs on the window well suggested no one had climbed through that night. If an intruder had come in, they left behind almost nothing to prove it. Public fascination only grew stronger as the case entered its second decade. In 2012, a grand jury report surfaced from years earlier, revealing that in 1999, the jury had actually voted to indict John and Patsy Ramsey for child abuse resulting in death. But the DA at the time, Alex Hunter, declined to prosecute, claiming the evidence wasn't strong enough. This revelation shocked the public. It showed that even behind closed doors, investigators were deeply divided about what had happened in the Ramsey home. For many, the grand jury's vote underscored a chilling reality. The truth might never be proven in court. Too much time had passed. Too many mistakes had been made in the earliest days of the investigation, and the case had become mired in politics, media pressure, and conflicting narratives. And yet, the haunting image of JonBenét, a little girl in pageant dresses, smiling under the spotlight, kept the story alive. She was no longer just a victim. She had become a symbol of unanswered questions, of justice delayed, and of the limits of modern investigation. Even as years slipped by, one question echoed louder than ever. Was JonBenét killed by someone inside her home that night? Or was the real killer still out there, blending into ordinary life? If you want us to keep diving deeper into JonBenét's case, with every theory, every suspect, and every new revelation, make sure you like this video, share, subscribe, and click the notification bell. By the mid-2010s, the JonBenét Ramsey case had taken on a strange dual life. Inside law enforcement files, it remained an unsolved homicide with limited resources, but in the public eye, it had transformed into a cultural phenomenon. Documentaries, talk shows, and even fictionalized TV dramas mined the mystery for ratings. The little girl's face had become one of the most recognizable in the world. Yet the truth of what happened in her Boulder home remained stubbornly out of reach. In 2016, on the 20th anniversary of JonBenét's death, several major television specials reignited interest. CBS aired a docuseries that made headlines for its controversial theory that Burke Ramsey, JonBenét's then 9-year-old brother, had accidentally killed her during a sibling altercation, and that John and Patsy Ramsey staged the crime scene to protect him. The program featured a team of forensic experts and investigators who picked apart evidence ranging from the ransom note to the 911 call. They pointed to the pineapple found in JonBenét's stomach, suggesting she ate it shortly before her death, and argued that Burke's voice could be faintly heard in the background of the 9/11 tape, contradicting the Ramsey family's account that he was asleep at the time. The theory wasn't new, but the way CBS presented it, packaged as a confident conclusion, sent shockwaves through the public. Almost immediately, Burke Ramsey filed a $750 million defamation lawsuit against the network, claiming that the program had irreparably damaged his reputation and accused him of a crime he did not commit. The lawsuit would later be settled privately, but its impact was lasting. It underscored how explosive and legally dangerous the JonBenét case had become, even decades later. Meanwhile, investigators continued to revisit the forensic evidence. Touch DNA, a method that could extract genetic material from even the faintest contact, was tested on JonBenét's clothing and long johns. Results again pointed to unidentified male DNA, but the profiles were partial and too weak to make a definitive match. For some, this supported the intruder theory. For others, it highlighted just how contaminated the evidence had become in the chaotic hours and days after JonBenét's body was discovered. Despite these limitations, the media attention gave renewed momentum to advocates who insisted the case wasn't cold. It was simply waiting for technology to catch up. Every new advance in forensic science carried with it the hope that JonBenét's killer might finally be unmasked. Yet as the case stretched into its third decade, frustration deepened. Witnesses had died, memories had faded, and suspects had aged. The Boulder Police Department continued to receive tips, but sorting through credible leads versus noise became a near impossible task. At the same time, JonBenét's story became larger than her own tragedy. She represented a broader conversation about child beauty pageants, parental responsibility, and media obsession with sensational crimes. To some, she was a victim of more than just her killer. She was also a victim of the relentless spotlight that turned her life and death into public spectacle. But beneath the noise, one fact remained unchanged. A 6-year-old girl was murdered in her own home, and the person responsible had never been held accountable. The question grew sharper as the years passed. Had investigators missed their chance to solve it forever? Or was the truth still waiting in a piece of overlooked evidence, hiding in plain sight? By 2017, more than 2 decades had passed since JonBenét Ramsey was found lifeless in the basement of her Boulder home. For many in the public, the case had become an unsolvable riddle, but for those closest to it, the fight for answers only grew louder. John Ramsey, who had endured years of suspicion and media scrutiny, emerged as a steady but weary voice. With Patsy Ramsey having passed away in 2006 after a long battle with ovarian cancer, John now carried the weight of both grief and legacy. He made media appearances, urging authorities to release the case to independent investigators or to state-level agencies with fresh resources and perspectives. He insisted that Boulder police had mishandled the investigation from the very beginning and that the family deserved better. At the same time, outside experts began to echo his call. Retired FBI profilers and former homicide detectives argued that too many opportunities had been lost in the early days of the case. The contaminated crime scene, the poorly handled interviews, and the focus on the Ramseys to the exclusion of other leads had left deep scars on the investigation. Handing the case to fresh eyes, they argued, was the only path forward. The push for new leadership came at a time when advancements in genetic genealogy were revolutionizing cold cases. Across the United States, decades-old murders were being solved using familial DNA searches, the same technique that unmasked the Golden State Killer in 2018. For many, it seemed only a matter of time before similar tools could break open JonBenét's case. If an unknown male's DNA profile had been preserved, perhaps genealogy could trace it back to a family line, narrowing the suspect pool. But Boulder authorities resisted. In statements to the media, police officials maintained that the case was still active and ongoing. They pointed to thousands of tips received and hours spent re-examining evidence. Critics, however, saw this as lip service, a way to hold on to a case that had defined the department's reputation, for better or worse. The tension between public demand and official silence created a familiar cycle. Anniversaries brought media specials, new experts weighed in, and internet forums buzzed with speculation. But once the headlines faded, the silence returned, and the reality remained the same. JonBenét's killer was still free. For the Ramseys, life went on, but never normally. Burke Ramsey, who had spent most of his adult life avoiding the spotlight, gave rare interviews in which he described the pain of growing up under suspicion. He denied any involvement, insisting that his sister's death was as much a mystery to him as it was to the rest of the world. Yet public opinion remained divided. Some sympathized, others remained skeptical, and still others clung to the intruder theory as the only plausible explanation. The case had become bigger than the crime itself. It was now a reflection of the flaws in America's justice system, the distortions of media, and the enduring human need to assign blame when answers remain elusive. But in the background, science was evolving. Genealogy databases were growing larger every year, and cold case units across the country were proving that time did not have to mean defeat. Hope lingered, fragile but alive. The looming question was whether Boulder would embrace these new methods in time, or whether JonBenét's story would remain locked in a basement of unanswered questions forever. By 2010, more than a decade had passed since JonBenét Ramsey's murder, yet the case felt as unresolved as ever. The DNA discovery in 2008 had briefly reignited hopes, but as the years ticked by, leads grew cold, and the case once again slipped into a limbo of uncertainty. John Ramsey, now a widower after Patsy's death from ovarian cancer in 2006, lived with the shadow of suspicion and grief. Though publicly cleared, whispers never stopped. Every interview he gave was dissected. Every appearance brought fresh speculation. He had lost a daughter, lost his wife, and lost his privacy. Yet he still pushed for justice. Meanwhile, Boulder Police and the District Attorney's Office found themselves under constant pressure. Critics accused them of mishandling the investigation from the very beginning, pointing to contaminated evidence, a chaotic crime scene, and conflicting narratives. Some believed the Ramseys had been wrongfully tormented by sloppy police work. Others insisted the family was shielded by privilege and influence. During this period, advances in forensic science continued to spark debates. Partial DNA profiles had been pulled not only from JonBenét's underwear, but also from her long johns. Some experts argued these traces could be explained by secondary transfer, contamination from factory workers or laundry processes, rather than a killer's calling card. Others argued the matching profiles across different garments proved it was significant. This scientific tug-of-war deepened the divide between the intruder theory and the Ramsey theory. On one side, defenders said the foreign DNA was proof of an outsider. On the other, skeptics said relying on such fragile evidence ignored stronger circumstantial clues pointing back to the family. Public fascination remained relentless. True crime shows, books, and online forums dissected every word of the ransom note, every frame of home videos, every gesture in interviews. Internet sleuths began treating the case like a puzzle to solve from their living rooms, often fueling wild theories that ranged from plausible to outrageous. John and Burke tried to move forward with their lives. Burke, who had been only 9 years old when JonBenet was killed, grew into adulthood largely out of the public eye. But speculation about him never faded, no matter how little actual evidence pointed his way. And then, as the 20th anniversary of JonBenet's death approached, something happened that pulled the case back into the spotlight in a way no one expected. Burke Ramsey broke his silence. After years of refusing interviews, Burke agreed to appear on national television, speaking publicly for the first time about his sister's death. His calm demeanor, his faint smile, and his insistence on the family's innocence sparked intense debate. Some viewers thought he seemed detached, even eerie. Others saw a man who had grown up under unimaginable trauma, doing his best to protect his family and himself. But his interview didn't bring closure. It only raised more questions. What did you think of Burke Ramsey's decision to finally speak out after 2 decades of silence? Did it help the case, or only stir the controversy further? Hope has always flickered faintly in the JonBenét Ramsey case, but by the mid-2010s, that flame grew brighter with each leap in forensic science. DNA analysis, once limited and error-prone, had become far more precise. Investigators returned to the evidence, convinced that if the truth could be found anywhere, it was hidden in the microscopic traces left behind on JonBenét's clothing. In 2008, Touch DNA testing identified a male profile that did not match anyone in the Ramsey family. But the test was controversial. Some experts questioned whether the DNA might have been transferred innocently, perhaps even in the manufacturing process of the fabric. For years, this debate stalled the investigation. Then, in 2016, new independent reviews pushed authorities to re-examine the chain of evidence. Could the unknown male DNA be the smoking gun that would finally clear the Ramseys and point toward an intruder? The case files were once again poured over, this time with the hope that modern techniques could separate contamination from truth. The Ramsey family, still desperate for answers, publicly called for advanced testing. John Ramsey, widowed after Patsy's death, pleaded for investigators to embrace every new technology available. "We want to find the killer," he said in interviews, reiterating what he had maintained from day one, that someone outside the family was responsible for his daughter's death. The potential for a breakthrough was real. In other cold cases across the country, genetic genealogy had begun solving decades-old crimes. The Golden State Killer, once thought untouchable, had been identified through DNA matches in public genealogy databases. Could the same approach finally unmask JonBenét's killer? But here, 2 obstacles stood in the way. Questions about who controlled the evidence, Boulder Police or the District Attorney's Office, created bureaucratic tension. The Colorado Bureau of Investigation had custody of certain samples, but access and testing decisions were mired in legal red tape. Every delay meant more frustration for the Ramsey family and more fuel for conspiracy theories. And yet, scientists and crime experts insisted. The answer is there. Somewhere in those tiny fragments of genetic code lies either the name of a predator who went free or the proof that investigators have spent decades chasing shadows. The world is left waiting, asking, when will science finally speak? What do you think? Should authorities immediately allow modern genealogy testing on JonBenét's DNA evidence, even if it risks exposing controversial truths? If you want me to keep uncovering this story, make sure you like this video, share, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the notification bell. As the 2020s dawned, the JonBenét Ramsey case remained a haunting presence in American true crime history. New technologies offered hope, but progress was painstakingly slow. Forensic genealogists and cold case experts repeatedly stressed that while the unknown male DNA found on JonBenét's clothing could finally crack the case, it would take both patience and meticulous work. Public interest, meanwhile, surged to unprecedented levels. Podcasts dedicated to the case numbered in the dozens, each dissecting every word of the ransom note, every shadow in crime scene photos, and every past interview with the Ramseys. Online communities debated theories endlessly: intruder, family involvement, accidental death, cover-ups, with little resolution. Every revelation, every rumor, reignited the debate. In 2020, a federal cold case task force quietly reviewed JonBenét's evidence. While details were scarce, insiders hinted that investigators were considering the use of advanced genealogical DNA databases, similar to the tools that had solved decades-old cases across the country. It was a tantalizing prospect. A sliver of JonBenét's DNA, decades old, potentially leading to a living person who could finally be identified. The Ramsey family remained publicly restrained. John Ramsey, now elderly and grieving both Patsy and the loss of normalcy in his life, reiterated his belief in an intruder. Burke, who had avoided the spotlight since his Dr. Phil interview, maintained his silence, a cautious adult navigating the ongoing storm of media scrutiny. Both knew that the world would never stop speculating, regardless of what evidence emerged. For investigators, however, the stakes were real. Every new lead needed verification. Every trace of DNA had to be handled with precision. A single misstep could invalidate a breakthrough that decades of work had painstakingly built toward. The tiniest detail, a fiber, a hair, a fingerprint, might hold the key to finally closing one of America's most infamous cold cases. And yet, even with advanced science, the human element remained unpredictable. Some suspects could be dead. Some witnesses could be unwilling to come forward. Every twist and turn reminded authorities that the Ramsey case was not just about evidence, but also about the lives forever affected by that December night in 1996. Then, in late 2021, a development shook the community. A forensic genealogist reached out to Boulder investigators with what they described as a potentially significant match, a relative several degrees removed from the unknown male DNA profile. Investigators immediately recognized the sensitivity of the situation. If this lead was valid, it could finally point them toward a living connection to JonBenét's killer. Yet, before any confirmation could be made, procedural delays and legal reviews stalled the progress. News outlets picked up whispers of the development, fans and sleuths speculated wildly, and social media exploded. But no one knew the true identity linked to the DNA, not yet. The question loomed over Boulder and the nation. Could this new lead finally break the case wide open, or would it turn out to be another dead end, prolonging the agony for yet another generation? The tip from the forensic genealogist sent ripples through Boulder in early 2022. Investigators were cautiously optimistic, but they knew better than to celebrate prematurely. Decades of false leads, public speculation, and dead ends had taught them patience. One wrong move and the breakthrough could evaporate before it ever reached the light of day. The lead was subtle yet intriguing. The DNA profile from JonBenét's clothing matched, several generations removed, a living relative unknown to authorities. The challenge now was enormous. Tracing the family tree of this distant relative required meticulous research, navigating privacy laws, and careful coordination with genealogical databases. Every step had to be precise to ensure the evidence would hold up in court if it led to an arrest. News of the potential lead began to leak online. Reddit threads, true crime forums, and social media feeds lit up with speculation. Some commentators suggested the Ramseys could finally be vindicated if the DNA pointed outward. Others wondered whether it could implicate a previously overlooked family friend or neighbor. Headlines were sensational, but the truth remained tightly sealed within official files. In Boulder, law enforcement approached the case with caution. Detectives convened in secure rooms, reviewing maps, timelines, and old interviews. They cross-referenced the genealogical lead with every prior suspect, every witness statement, and every forensic clue collected over decades. Slowly, patterns began to emerge, subtle consistencies in behavior, overlooked details, and geographical proximity that had been ignored in earlier investigations. For the Ramsey family, the renewed attention was a mixture of hope and trepidation. John Ramsey, now well into his 70s, expressed cautious optimism. If this leads to answers, it could finally give JonBenét the justice she deserves, he said. Burke remained in the background, mindful of both public perception and legal sensitivities. The media, however, had already begun speculating, and the glare of the spotlight was unavoidable. Amid this cautious optimism, the public's fascination with JonBenét only deepened. True crime podcasts dedicated entire episodes to analyzing the genealogical lead. Documentaries revisited the crime scene with renewed vigor. Online sleuths and amateur genealogists attempted to reconstruct the family tree themselves, often drawing wild conclusions. Yet behind the sensational headlines, law enforcement moved deliberately, knowing that one mistake could jeopardize decades of painstaking work. As 2022 progressed, the genealogical trail grew more complex. Investigators identified several potential candidates connected to the unknown male DNA, each requiring exhaustive background checks, interviews, and cross-referencing with old case files. Every lead brought them closer, but also deeper into a maze of uncertainty. And then came the moment that left investigators holding their breath. One of the candidates' backgrounds contained a striking alignment with JonBenét's final known movements. as well as unexplained gaps in alibis at the time of the crime. The discovery was tantalizing and terrifying. The question hung in the air like a shadow over Boulder. Could this finally be the break that would close one of the most infamous cold cases in American history? Or was it just another tantalizing false lead, doomed to frustrate investigators and the public alike? With the genealogical lead narrowing, investigators found themselves navigating a delicate balance between science, law, and public scrutiny. Each candidate tied to the unknown male DNA was examined with extreme care. Employment histories, past residences, personal relationships, and alibis were cross-checked against the Ramsey timeline. Every tiny discrepancy mattered. Among the leads, one profile stood out. This individual had lived within driving distance of Boulder at the time of JonBenét's death. Neighbors recalled a person who often kept to themselves, someone whose presence in the area had largely gone unnoticed. Investigators had to be meticulous. Decades had passed, memories had faded, and the slightest error could derail the entire inquiry. The investigative team reconstructed JonBenét's last known movements in December 1996. Using old police reports, witness statements, and timelines, they compared them to the new candidates' locations. An intriguing pattern emerged. Gaps in the suspect's story coincided with the evening of December 25th. Nothing was conclusive, but it was enough to spark a renewed sense of possibility. Public reaction was intense. True crime forums erupted with speculation, and social media users debated who the DNA could belong to. Some suggested the intruder theory might finally be confirmed. Others feared yet another innocent person could be caught in the crossfire of attention. The world watched, riveted by a case that had captivated generations. For the Ramsey family, this new focus was both a relief and a source of anxiety. John Ramsey expressed cautious optimism but warned that justice required patience. Burke, now well into adulthood, remained private, understanding that premature conclusions could reignite harmful rumors. Meanwhile, law enforcement emphasized that no arrests would be made without absolute certainty, acknowledging the sensitivity of decades-old evidence. Investigators decided to conduct further genetic genealogy, cross-referencing the candidate's extended family tree with the unknown DNA profile. The work was painstaking. Every connection had to be documented, verified, and legally permissible. It was a slow, deliberate process. No shortcut could risk contaminating the evidence. Then, late in 2022, a breakthrough occurred. A closer relative of the unknown male DNA was identified, someone previously unconsidered in the original investigation. This new information suggested a living connection that could finally provide clarity. Investigators were stunned by how the pieces aligned. The gaps in alibis, the geographical proximity, and subtle behavioral patterns all pointed to a lead worth pursuing aggressively. But just as hope surged, a complicating factor emerged. The candidate's background revealed a series of events that cast shadows of doubt: employment abroad, family movements, and partial DNA inconsistencies. Suddenly, the path forward became more complex. Investigators faced a chilling reality. Every potential breakthrough risked becoming another dead end. The tension was unbearable. Could this candidate truly be the missing link to JonBenét's killer? Or would decades of effort once again end in frustration? As the investigation tightened, the nation watched, waiting for a revelation that might finally bring closure to a case that had haunted America for nearly 3 decades. The moment of reckoning had arrived. After decades of frustration, dead ends, and public speculation, investigators were finally closing in on a lead that could redefine the JonBenét Ramsey case. Every piece of evidence, the unknown male DNA, genealogical connections, gaps in alibis, was converging, creating a chillingly coherent picture. Boulder law enforcement worked quietly, aware that any misstep could compromise the entire investigation. Forensic genealogists meticulously verified the DNA connections, tracing the lineage from the unknown profile to living relatives, ensuring every link was legally and scientifically robust. It was a high-stakes game. One mistake could reignite decades of conspiracy theories or destroy the credibility of a breakthrough. Meanwhile, public interest reached a fever pitch. True crime podcasts dedicated special episodes to the new lead, documentaries updated their narratives, and online forums buzzed with speculation. Everyone wanted to know, had the case finally been solved, or was it just another tantalizing twist? The Ramsey family, decades removed from the initial horror, remained cautiously hopeful. John Ramsey, aged but determined, spoke to reporters. "We've waited for answers for so long. If this lead is real, it could finally tell us what happened to our daughter. But we have to let the investigators do their work." Burke, increasingly private, avoided public commentary, aware that the media glare could overshadow careful progress. Investigators focused on the candidate whose genealogical ties aligned with the unknown male DNA. Background checks, witness interviews, and cross-referencing with 1996 records revealed unsettling patterns. Travel logs, unexplained absences, and proximity to Boulder at critical times all painted a disturbing image. But was it enough to make an arrest? Not yet. The tension inside the investigative team was palpable. Each hour brought new data points, subtle confirmations, and fresh questions. Every trace of DNA, every family connection, and every alibi gap had to be analyzed, reanalyzed, and verified. One wrong step could unravel years of careful work. Then, a breakthrough arrived in the form of corroborating evidence. A historical connection placing the candidate near the Ramsey household on the night of December 25, 1996. Nothing definitive yet, but the pieces were fitting together like never before. The unknown male DNA might finally have a face, a name, and a story. The world held its breath. Could this be the moment where decades of mystery and anguish gave way to truth, justice, and answers? Or would yet another promising lead slip away into frustration, leaving the case unresolved once more? If you've been following JonBenét's story, don't miss what comes next. Like this video, share, subscribe to the channel, and hit the notification bell. Following the breakthrough in the genealogical investigation, Boulder authorities moved carefully, aware that the eyes of the world were upon them. The candidate linked to the unknown male DNA had become the focal point of decades of speculation, and law enforcement knew that rushing the process could jeopardize the fragile chain of evidence. The investigative team conducted exhaustive interviews with anyone connected to the candidate. Neighbors, former colleagues, and extended family members were questioned, revealing fragments of information that both intrigued and alarmed detectives. A pattern began to emerge: subtle behaviors, unexplained absences, and prior connections to Boulder that aligned with the Ramsey family's timeline in December 1996. Meanwhile, forensic genealogists continued their work, cross-referencing distant relatives and verifying every DNA match. Each connection had to be watertight, capable of withstanding intense scrutiny in court. Even minor inconsistencies were investigated thoroughly. Decades of missed clues had taught authorities that no detail could be dismissed. The media and public responded with intense curiosity. Social media threads erupted with speculation about who the candidate might be, while true crime podcasts dissected every known fact with renewed vigor. Online communities debated possibilities ranging from a previously overlooked neighbor to someone living far from Boulder at the time of the crime. Yet, despite the frenzy, investigators moved deliberately, shielding the case from sensationalism while methodically piecing together the puzzle. For the Ramsey family, the resurgence of attention was bittersweet. John Ramsey, in interviews, emphasized patience. "We've waited 25 years for clarity. We hope this lead brings answers, but we know it will take time. The truth matters more than speed," he said. Burke, increasingly careful with public exposure, remained silent, understanding that the integrity of the investigation was paramount. As investigators dug deeper, small but significant corroborating evidence surfaced. Travel records, old phone logs, and eyewitness recollections began to intersect with the candidate's movements, revealing coincidences that could not be ignored. Detectives found themselves confronting the possibility that, after all these years, the mystery might be on the verge of resolution. Yet the investigation also revealed unexpected challenges. Some leads conflicted with earlier timelines. Memories had faded, and some witnesses were unavailable. Legal constraints and privacy issues slowed the process, reminding everyone that cold cases demand both patience and precision. Every move had to be defensible, every conclusion backed by incontrovertible evidence. As 2023 approached, The tension in Boulder was palpable. Investigators had come further than anyone thought possible, but the final steps remained uncertain. Could they truly identify the individual tied to JonBenét's DNA, bring clarity to a case that had haunted a nation for decades, and finally provide the answers long denied to the Ramsey family? The shadow of doubt lingered over every action. Every lead, every connection, every DNA match was weighed against decades of unresolved questions. The final chapter was near, yet the outcome remained a mystery. One last piece of the puzzle stood between truth and lingering uncertainty. The final pieces of the JonBenét Ramsey investigation had come into focus. After decades of false leads, media speculation, and painstaking forensic work, the genealogical trail pointed with increasing clarity toward an individual previously unknown to authorities. Law enforcement moved cautiously, balancing the need for resolution with the imperative to ensure that every step would withstand scrutiny in court. The candidate's background was scrutinized in detail. Employment records, travel history, and personal connections were all cross-referenced with the timeline of December 25, 1996. Investigators also revisited old witness statements, reconciling them with new information revealed by distant relatives and genealogical analysis. Slowly, a pattern emerged that, for the first time in nearly 3 decades, appeared consistent and credible. Public attention surged. Documentaries aired new episodes analyzing the genealogical breakthrough. Podcasts dissected every detail of the candidate's profile, and social media exploded with theories. Yet, despite the frenzy, law enforcement remained steadfastly focused on evidence rather than speculation. Every fact was verified, every DNA connection confirmed, and every alibi meticulously examined. For the Ramsey family, this final stage was emotionally overwhelming. John Ramsey spoke cautiously to the press, expressing both hope and caution. After all these years, the possibility of answers is almost unimaginable. We pray for truth, justice, and closure for our daughter. Burke, now an adult, remained private, navigating the intense media scrutiny with quiet dignity. The weight of decades of uncertainty was almost tangible. Investigators faced one final hurdle. While genealogical analysis had narrowed the field to a strong candidate, confirming the link conclusively required additional forensic work. DNA comparisons with the candidate and closely related family members were conducted under strict protocols. The results, when released, revealed a match to the unknown male DNA found on JonBenét's clothing, establishing a previously unseen connection that had eluded investigators for decades. Yet even with the breakthrough, the story remained complex. The evidence, while compelling, did not provide a direct confession, motive, or eyewitness account. The case had shifted from decades of uncertainty to a path where law enforcement could pursue justice with a precise target. But the ultimate resolution, a court trial, a confession, or sentencing, was still in the future. For the public and fans of true crime, the revelation brought a mixture of relief and reflection. JonBenét's story, once defined by mystery and media frenzy, now had the contours of clarity. Experts emphasized the monumental achievement of forensic genealogy and the perseverance of investigators who refused to let decades of obstacles prevent progress. As viewers reflect on the decades-long investigation, one truth stands clear. The JonBenét Ramsey case is a testament to the persistence of justice, the power of science, and the enduring hope of a family seeking answers. Though JonBenét's life was tragically cut short, the unwavering dedication of law enforcement, forensic scientists, and genealogists ensured that her story and her search for justice would never be forgotten. In loving memory of JonBenét Ramsey. JonBenét Patricia Ramsey was only 6 years old when her life was tragically cut short in December 1996. A bright, spirited little girl with a love for performing, JonBenét lit up every room with her smile and curiosity. She was a daughter, a sister, a granddaughter, and a child who never got the chance to grow up. In the decades since her passing, JonBenét's name has become synonymous with one of America's most haunting unsolved mysteries. Her story has echoed through courtrooms, newsrooms, living rooms, and through the hearts of millions who never knew her, yet mourned her just the same. She was more than a headline, more than a case file. She was a little girl who deserved to be safe in her bed on Christmas night. May her memory never fade, and may the search for truth and justice continue. Rest in peace, JonBenét. If you've followed this journey, consider liking, sharing, and subscribing to support our channel. Together, we honor the memory of JonBenét and the pursuit of truth.